Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Melinda Herring, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. Dr. Anders Åslund, my great colleague, has just authored a new report, which is called The Consequences of Nord Stream 2, and he's going to tell us all about that report in a few minutes. We're joined by Ambassador John Herbst, the Director of the Eurasia Center, who's going to offer commentary, Ambassador Daniel Fried, also my colleague at the Atlantic Council, and Dr. Agnia Grigas, a non-resident fellow at the Eurasia Center. Welcome to you all. You're really in for a treat today. We will also have remarks from Capitol Hill. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Anders. Congratulations on your new report. Anders, let me kick you off and get you started. If you could tell us a little bit more, what will the effects be if Nord Stream 2, the Russian pipeline, is completed? Over to you. Thank you, Anders, and congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melinda, and good morning, everybody. The idea of this report is simply to sum up which are the different effects. Far too often, Nord Stream 2 is discussed as only two things, gas from Russia to Germany, or Ukraine not earning any money any longer. And the purpose of this report is to show that the effects are really multiple. So you can see it here on the screen. I put up 7 different effects of Nord Stream 2 if it's actually completed. First of all, national security. It facilitates Russian military action in Ukraine and Belarus. A reason that has not been much thought of is that for Russia not to bomb Ukraine or move in more heavily is that it would automatically disrupt gas supplies to Europe. And if there's no gas going through Ukraine or Belarus, then that is no longer an impediment. Energy security is deteriorated from a completion of Nord Stream 2. It means that 80% of all gas supplies to Europe will go through one pipeline system. This is an unacceptable lack of security when the European idea is generally to improve security and not to deteriorate it. Then the third effect, which I think personally is the most important, is the geopolitical effect. This is a Russian attempt to break Germany and Austria away from the EU and the West. And it's really remarkable that Germany, that is normally the most multilateral big European country, has acted so unilaterally for so many years. Since 2005, having most of the EU members against itself, with support only from Austria, the Netherlands, Belgium, and sometimes from France, and with 5 big European energy companies. And how did this come about? It's essentially one man, Gerhard Schröder, who was Chancellor of Germany from 1998 until 2005. Before that, he was the leading social democrat in Lower Saxony, and he had then 2 underlings. One, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who's now president, and the other was Sigmar Gabriel, who was vice chancellor for 5 years and who has been very operative when it comes to Nord Stream 2. So this is essentially a group of 3 men who have dominated the Social Democratic Party that have insisted on this in the coalition agreement with CDU. There are others also, but these are the 3 critical people. And why? Sigmar Gabriel actually said in a meeting with Putin in October 2015, what's most important as far as legal issues are concerned is that we strive to ensure that all this remains under the competence of the German authorities. So this is really the aim, to get a Russian-German cooperation. And it's a social democratic project and not a general German project. In Austria, we have seen that It's sort of become a standard pension scheme, retirement scheme for senior politicians to join Russian state companies, either as consultant or as a board member. For European energy policy, it means that Nord Stream 2 undermines the EU liberalization of the gas market, and it goes against the ideas of unbundling. Here, it has been a curious question, where does EU energy policy start in the Baltic Sea? How far from the German coast, if at all? Governance, here is what I also think is a major problem. It promotes corruption in Germany and Austria. It's impossible to understand that a leading European country can accept what then Chancellor Schröder did. First decide, after he has lost the elections in 2005, that Nord Stream 1 should be built, and then a few days later, after he has gone, be appointed by President Putin, chairman of the shareholders committee of Nord Stream, and he has made many $1 million on his positions since then. He's now chairman of Rosneft for $600,000 a year officially, and then we don't know how much he earns as chairman of Nord Stream 1 and 2. Gas supply, here the funny thing is that there's no impact at all. Russia's gas supply to Europe peaked in 2019. The current oversupply of gas pipelines is almost 100%, and that's before Nord Stream 2 is being completed. So Gazprom is just building this for other reasons, for corrupt and geopolitical reasons, not because they need more pipelines. And the financial effects, which are so much discussed, are not so important. It means essentially that $2 billion don't go to Ukraine, but to Germany instead, because the transit cost will be necessary through Germany. This new gas is not meant for Germany, but it's for transportation to other European countries. So the summary of this is 6 negative effects and no positive effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anders. That was fantastic and succinct. This is really helpful. What do we do about it, though? I think we're somewhere between 95 to 99% complete. What can be done?
Well, there's no reason to complete it. Today, we just learned that Academic Chersky, the best Russian pipeline ship, has been brought in to work on it. But this will take several months to complete. It's 150 kilometers left, and this is in the Danish zone, which is the most difficult zone. So what could be done? Germany should stop it. I think that this is a demand that we should pose to Chancellor Angela Merkel, who has never been very positive about it. But she has given in as a compromise to her coalition partner in the Social Democratic Party. The second is that the EU can stop Nord Stream 2, since it violates EU energy policy, and there are many parts of the EU that could possibly do that. And the US is obliged to impose a sanction that can stop Nord Stream 2. This is what I think is most likely, and I think this will happen very soon because of the pressure from the Congress that we will hear about in a minute. And also, if Germany is unable to stop Putin's 2 leading representatives in Europe, Gerhard Schröder and Matthias Warnig, I think that the US should sanction them according to the new executive order that was issued on the 15th of April. Ukraine linked sanctions on Russia from 2014, or CATSA from 2017. And I don't see anything wrong in that. The United States has sanctioned Finnish, Swedish, Latvian, and Slovak citizens, and that has caused no protest. If Germany is not able to discipline Russian agents in Germany, friends should help friends. And the EU fights hard for the rule of law in EU member countries like Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Poland? Why shouldn't the US help Germany when it has problems with the rule of law? Friends help friends also to protect the rule of law. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anders. We are now going to transition and welcome Representative Marcy Kaptur and Representative Brian Fitzpatrick. Representative Kaptur is from the great state of Pennsylvania, and Representative Kaptur is from Ohio, and Representative Fitzpatrick is from Pennsylvania, and both are co-chairs of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus. So Representative Marcy Kaptur is a great voice on Capitol Hill. She unfortunately could not be here and sent her a statement that I'm going to read now, and then we'll turn it over to Representative Fitzpatrick. So here we go. This is Representative Marcy Kaptur's statement on Nord Stream 2. As co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Ukraine Caucus, I send warmest greetings to our friends in Ukraine and across the transatlantic community. I express my thanks to the Atlantic Council for hosting this important event. I congratulate Dr. Anders Åslund for authoring this report, as well as Ambassador John Herbst and Ambassador Fried for joining this conversation. I am deeply concerned with the near completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is 95% close to being finished. Tragically, Russia has a demonstrated history of using energy to undermine global democratic institutions. For example, in 2006 and 2009, Russian authorities cut off gas flows through Ukraine during the bitter cold of winter. This led to suffering not only for Ukraine's people, but also folks in neighboring countries like Bulgaria and Romania. Additionally, the pipeline would also undermine Ukraine's security, a nation facing down brutal Russian aggression. I believe Ukraine to be the scrimmage line on the European continent. Yet due to Russia's illegal war on Ukraine, over 14,000 innocents have lost their lives and millions more have been displaced. Russia amassed over 100,000 troops in and close to Ukrainian territories. I strongly condemn Russia's unilateral escalatory behavior and am thankful for Ukraine's measured response to defend its territory. I share the report's concerns that a Nord Stream 2 pipeline would help Russia spread its corruption throughout Europe and corrode democratic institutions. I am personally troubled by the role former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder has played to advocate for the pipeline. He is willing to write off Ukraine and undermine liberty in Europe just to enrich himself on the board of Gazprom. For these reasons, our Congressional Ukraine Caucus has led efforts in the House of Representatives to pass sanctions on Nord Stream 2, now twice on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis. These sanctions are not discretionary, they are mandatory. I continue to strongly urge the administration to move more swiftly to sanction the pipeline to ensure it never sees completion. In conclusion, I thank the Atlantic Council. I know that working together across the aisle and across the Atlantic, we will ensure a Europe that is undivided, prosperous, energy secure, and free. Thank you very, very much. These were Marcy Kaptur's remarks. And now over to Representative Fitzpatrick from the great state of Pennsylvania.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you today to discuss the new report on Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The Biden administration took necessary steps toward holding Russia accountable for the malicious SolarWinds cyber attack, attempts to influence U.S. elections and other destabilizing activities by issuing sanctions on Russian individuals and entities that enable this behavior. We must recognize the importance of these sanctions in imposing costs on the Putin regime for its malign actions. Russia's interference and influence campaigns against our government and private institutions are a direct assault on the democratic values of America that cannot go unanswered. While these initial sanctions are a step in the right direction, I think we can all agree that we must proactively respond to this threat that is being posed with the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. As the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe, Energy, the Environment, and Cyber, I believe we must hold Russia accountable for the threat that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline actively poses to Europe's energy security, primarily that of Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, the EU, and the Eastern European bloc as a whole. If completed, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline will cause irreparable damage to our NATO allies and partners. The pipeline would circumvent the supply lines running through Ukraine and send Russian natural gas to Germany, thus undermining Ukraine while increasing Russia's influence over Europe's energy sector. The United States must be proactive. We cannot wait for Russia to once again weaponize its energy resources for coercive purposes. When we consider the harm that our NATO allies stand to suffer from its construction, Germany can no longer claim that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is purely an economic project. The pipeline's construction poses threats regarding international order, economic interests, national security, and energy stability. For example, since the pipeline was first announced in 2015, it has been clear that Russia intends for its construction to serve as a geopolitical project with its primary aim to be breaking up the EU by forming an alliance with Germany and Austria against Eastern and Northern Europe. Russia also has financial motives for the construction of the pipeline. The money that Russia earns from pumping its gas via the Nord Stream 2 to Europe would likely be used to gain influence over other European countries and perhaps even be used to destabilize the West in the future. As a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, I can see the risks associated with the pipeline's construction from a national security perspective as well. The infrastructure used by the Russian pipeline beneath the Baltic Sea could allow the Kremlin to embed surveillance devices. Ultimately, although the project is 95% completed, the U.S. still has time to step in and impose additional sanctions that will delay construction or halt it altogether. I will continue to champion this issue with my colleagues on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the subcommittee that I lead because the stability of our transatlantic alliances are at stake. I thank you for taking the time to engage on this timely and important issue. God bless.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank Representative Fitzpatrick and Representative Chapter for their moral leadership and their clarity on this issue. Now, it's my pleasure to bring in our other discussants. We are going to jump in and discuss Anders' paper and also what Nord Stream 2 means for Europe and the United States. If you have a question, we'd love to take a stab at it. You can type it in the chat box or send it to us on Twitter. Ambassador Herbst, I'd like to start with you and go straight to the heart of this issue. Isn't it too late? Nord Stream 2 is almost done. What can be done to stop it, in your view, sir?
It's late, but it's not too late. When Congress put its sanctions through in 2019, construction on the project was going rapidly. After those sanctions were then, construction stopped. You had a second round of sanctions in December of 20. It's only now with the new administration that the project managers felt emboldened to proceed with construction. And if the Biden administration does implement the sanctions as required by law, the project construction will stop. It may, and I think it will probably kill the project, but will certainly halt it.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Herbst. Ambassador Fried, you've taken the position that Nord Stream 2 is a bad thing, but it would be worse for the United States to sanction an ally, and by that we mean Germany. Why do you think that? Isn't the argument that allies should not sanction allies bogus, since the sanctions are written to avoid sanctions on German firms?
Well, first, let me applaud Anders' paper and his arguments. Okay, let me just stipulate that he's right. The Poles and Ukrainians have been right for a long time, and Anders puts together their arguments in a powerful way. Okay, Nord Stream 2 is a bad idea. That's fact number one. Second fact is that it would be costly to try to sanction it to death. Of course, you're right that the United States has imposed sanctions on Western European companies and individuals. That happens. So there's no general prohibition, but it is true that in Germany, even opponents of Nord Stream 2 hate the idea of US sanctions to kill it. Okay, it's costly. I'm not saying it's utterly unjustified. We may well end up there. John Herbst may be right. It may be possible to kill Nord Stream 2 with sanctions at this stage. That may be possible, but it's not certain. It's not certain. we in Germany are in a bit of a prisoner's dilemma here, where if we seek our maximum objectives, we may end up hurting ourselves. Now, I say this not to apologize for Nord Stream 2, and I really just cannot stand the argument that it's just the paranoid Ukrainians and Poles that are upset by it. No, the German Greens don't like it. The European Commission doesn't like it. The Balts don't like it. The senior French government officials have come out against it. It's a bad idea. To your point, Melinda, shouldn't friends help friends? Right. Germany is not the problem. Putin and the Kremlin are the problem. Germany made a policy mistake with Nord Stream 2. They made a mistake. As an American official, I know about policy mistakes, right? Friends help friends get out of their policy mistakes, or at least we can try. What I have suggested is that it may be possible to mitigate much of the downside risks of Nord Stream 2. Now, Anders' arguments are accurate, and it was just brilliantly expressed. Wonderful paper. But it is also true that Europe's vulnerability and Ukraine's and Poland's vulnerability to Russian gas pressure is far less than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And the Ukrainians and Poles have not been idle. They've not just been complaining. They've been doing stuff, which means that they are less dependent on Russian gas, somewhat less dependent on Russian gas, and much less vulnerable to Russian cutoffs. They need to do more of it. They're not where they need to be, but it is possible to continue to mitigate the downside risks of Nord Stream 2. I mean, that's what part of the 3 Cs initiative is all about, which is a Central European initiative, which includes energy infrastructure. I'm making this up, right? But I've written about this, thought about it a bit. More interconnectors to provide gas to Poland and Ukraine from the West. Rigorous, better enforcement of the third energy package, the EU's third energy package. LNG and green new initiatives, and contingency sanctions so that if the Russians cut off gas through Ukraine through some bogus excuse, which they are very likely to do if Nord Stream 2 comes online, that there will be previously agreed sanctions with the Germans on board. Is this enough? Maybe not, but it is at least worth exploring whether there is a way to make sure that even if Putin gets his pipeline, he doesn't get the advantage he seeks through that pipeline. Now, could I be wrong? Yeah, possibly. If the German government sticks to its position that this is, a good thing, Nord Stream 2 is a good thing, or it's a strategic bridge to Moscow, the pressures from Democrats and Republicans in Congress will leave the Biden administration with no choice. They will have to try to sanction Nord Stream 2 to death. Okay, they may have to try. I mean, you heard Representative Fitzpatrick and Representative Kaptur. These are serious people. They thought this through, and their arguments are basically right. It is at least worth exploring whether there are alternatives. And by the way, this cannot be a U.S.-German deal, okay, or U.S.-German-Russian deal. If the United States wants to mitigate the risks of Nord Stream 2 at least cost to the Western alliance, it has to talk also to the Ukrainians and Poles. And I'm not asking the Poles to change their mind about Nord Stream 2. They won't. And let's just stipulate they're right, okay? And let's also stipulate that Germans should not tell Poles to calm down about the Kremlin. Like, bad idea, don't go there, okay? But if we start acknowledging reality, that Nord Stream 2 is a divisive pipeline that intends to isolate Ukraine and break EU gas integrity by dividing the EU into favored and non-favored countries, favored Germany, non-favored Poland, and start talking straight with the Poles and saying out loud what everybody knows, including the Germans, there may be a way forward. Now, there's an additional factor. The German Green Party is doing pretty well in the polls. I don't know whether that'll keep, but there are elections coming up in late September in Germany. The Green Party has said it opposes Nord Stream 2 on both environmental and strategic grounds. And these are serious people. Okay, so an idea on the table that I've heard from thoughtful Germans, is a moratorium, a freeze. Freeze construction, that's from the German side, and freeze implementation of sanctions, and give everybody time to think this through, look at alternatives, and maybe there'll be a new German government. But let's not rush to a confrontation now. Let's think this through. Now, I realize I have been accused of being an uber hawk on Putin, and sanctions coordinator. I helped design, and I was chief negotiator of the sanctions starting in 2014 after the Kremlin's attack on Ukraine. So it may surprise people that I'm not an uber hawk. The strategy, Anders is right. I'm repeating it. And John Herbst is right, about the strategic implications of Nord Stream 2. But you, Melinda, put it well. Friends need to help friends. Germany screwed it up. Okay? I'm not a diplomat, so I can say stuff like this.
Isn't it liberating, Dan? Thank you.
Yes, it is. But the United States government has screwed up plenty of things. And I remember in the Bush administration when Germany helped us get out of various jams. Okay? Friends help friends. Let's find a way forward. I know this sounds terribly naive, right? This American optimist that we can work it out. Okay, I plead guilty to that, but it's worth a try. But if we try, it has to be based on reality, which is that Nord Stream 2 is a mistake. Now, I'm not asking the Germans to fall on their knees and rend their garments, but let's be serious. And if you're going to talk to the Ukrainians and Poles and find out how to mitigate the downside risk of Nord Stream 2, you have to acknowledge reality. Okay?
Wonderful.
That's my thought.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very well put. Ambassador Herbst, I'm going to give you a chance to respond. Go ahead, sir.
Look, Dan is not paying sufficient attention to the time element. And in fact, he's talking as if the Biden administration has not been trying for 3 months to reach some sort of accommodation with Berlin. It has been, much to the frustration of Congress. And Berlin has offered exactly this, bupkis, nothing. Dan's idea, which I think is not a bad one, about a moratorium on construction and a moratorium on sanctions would make sense. But this idea is something that is available back in January and February. The Germans have gotten away before with serious sanctions violations when Siemens turbines wound up in Crimea. And this is another replay. I don't think Chancellor Merkel is so keen on Nord Stream 2, but for domestic reasons, she feels a need to do so. But this comes back to one other thing that's very, very important. Very, very important. Anders said correctly that the most dangerous thing about Nord Stream 2 is the geopolitical effect. This is an effort by the Kremlin to neutralize Germany, and to a lesser extent, because it's not as important, Austria. Anyone who studies history, I know Dan does, knows that when Moscow and Berlin get together, the countries in between suffer. That was true during the 19th century with the Holy Alliance of Prussia and Austria and Russia. It was true with Molotov-Ribbentrop, which gave Hitler reasons to begin the war, and Moscow reasons to seize gobs of territory in Eastern Europe. This is very dangerous. So there's a great American interest in stopping this project. If the Germans were serious about coming out of this corner, as Dan suggests, the moratorium idea would be in play, but it's not. It's not. So we have to stop it. And the Biden administration has been naive in considering only the quote unquote German element, because American national interests require this project not to go forward. And I'm confident that Congress will force the administration's hand. And we don't have the time to wait. If Germany comes out tomorrow with a sensible proposal, like on the moratorium, we should listen. But where is the German voice? They are counting on the bogus argument of allies should not sanction our allies to carry the day. And that is a bogus argument, and it's fraught with great danger for the United States and for Europe.
Thank you,
Melinda,
Ambassador.
can I just do a two-finger here?
Of course, go ahead, please.
To express my agreement with what I consider to be John's basic point. My argument may work if, but only if, the German government is willing to play. There are various ways in which it could play. It could have a moratorium without prejudice to the way it comes out. But Germany has to want to fix this, okay? And John said something with which I profoundly agree, which is that if Germany makes an offer, either quietly or publicly, more likely quietly, we should listen. But they have to act. So, I appreciate the fact that John's thought this through. And I agree with that central point. That's
Wonderful.
all. I just wanted to make that point so it was all clear.
Thank you, Ambassador Fried. I thought this was going to be a boring panel, but you've enlivened it. Thank you so much. Dr. Agnia-Grigas, I want to bring you in on this. You're a great expert on energy, on pipelines. And if you have any responses to the discussion Ambassador Fried and Ambassador Herbst have, I'd love to hear it. But let me ask you a really basic question. Why is Nord Stream 2 an American priority? Isn't it a European problem?
Well, the United States is, the largest NATO power. It is the security guarantor for a lot of the European countries. So if European security is threatened, and I think with Nord Stream 2, certainly their energy security will be threatened. And this is an American problem. It's an American problem where we will have to defend and we will have to be involved in Europe going forward to ensure their security.
Wonderful, thank you. We have fabulous questions, so I'm going to bring our audience in. The first question is from William Courtney, and I think that this goes to Ambassador Herbst. He says, how decisive might be the outcome of the German election in the fate of Nord Stream 2? So John, if you could remind us when the elections are, who's doing well in their positions on Nord Stream 2, go ahead.
Well, the elections are coming up this September, and it's expected that the Green Party will wind up in the government, and they could even do best of all parties in the election. And the Green Party is decisively against Nord Stream 2. But keep in mind that the elections happened in the early fall. The new government that's formed after that, the new configuration will come by at the end of the year. If construction goes at fast pace on Nord Stream 2, conceivably the project can be done before the impact of the Greens is felt. That's why it's important for us to act now, unless, in fact, there is an agreement on a moratorium.
Okay, great, thank you. Anders' question to you from Andreas Metz. He says, Nord Stream 2 is built according to European law and will be regulated by European law. It was approved by governments in Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and Germany. Why don't you respect this legal decision? If there would be a legal way to stop it, you can go to court. It's up to everyone. Yeah, you shouldn't stop interfering with extraterritorial US sanctions. They're against European law. And second question, why is Nord Stream 2 worse than the Jamal pipeline? This pipeline brings Russian gas via Belarus to Europe. Why not implement sanctions on Jamal to target also Lukashenko and Putin?
Yeah, let me take the second question first. The Jamal pipeline that goes through Belarus and Poland has a total capacity of 33 billion cubic meters per year, which is being used. The Nord Stream 1+2 will have 110 billion cubic meters. So it's a far bigger system. The Ukrainian pipeline, which is used today, has at least a capacity of 120 BCM. It could be as much as 160 BCM. And in recent years, it has normally been 80 to 90 BCM that goes. Last year, it was down to 60 BCM, and Gazprom is now taking it down to 40 BCM from this year. So the pipeline security is deteriorating because of a massive concentration to one system. It's clear that Russians only want to use Nord Stream 1+2 plus Turk Stream. The total Russian delivery of gas in the future will be 135 to 130 BCM. It will never be as much as it was in 2019. So there's no need for any additional pipeline. The sheer purpose is to replace the Ukrainian pipeline. And what the Russians can do is that they can stop delivery during the summer half year when less gas is needed in Europe. And then the Ukrainian pipeline system collapses because it needs to have a steady flow of gas. And then the Russians will say, okay, you Ukrainians can't deliver when we need you, that is during the winter. And this is not how it should be done. So this is the answer to the second question. On the law question, it's extremely difficult. What happened before the EU made various decisions is that it has been a massive fight within the European Commission, where the legal service has fallen strongly under German lobbyism in its interpretation. The energy commissioners have been strongly against Nordstrom 2 all along for the reasons it goes against the third energy package, which implies unbundling between delivery, production, and transportation. So the question is, how can it be done? For a long time, Opal, the big German pipeline online, was not admitted for Nord Stream, and through massive German lobbying, the Germans managed to overcome this. The German here, I mean the German government and the two big German energy companies involved. So it's not clear what the law says. With regard to the Nordic countries, it's not going through any territorial waters, but it's going through the economic zones. Sweden opposed Nord Stream 1 in its original design because it would have a pump station in the middle of the Baltic, which the Russians could claim is territorial water. And therefore, Sweden did not accept that. And for Sweden and Finland, there are only environmental reasons, and Nord Stream has complied with the rules. Now, the last bit is entirely through Danish economic zone. The Danes said no for it going through its territorial waters, which was the original proposal. And there are lots of discussions about this. One of the Danish demands for any construction in their economic zone is that there are third country certifiers and insurers, something that is not fulfilled currently. So this should be a reason for the Danish authorities to say no for it. Last summer, the Danish authorities blocked any work by the Russians for 2 months in the summer because of the fishing season, that it should not disturb the fishes. So there are many legal arguments. And of course, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just listening to the different discussions about it. But it's not a question that this is acceptable to EU law. It is that the Germans have insisted on a large number of exceptions from the third energy package of 2009 and from the energy union of 2015. So this is highly dubious from a legal point of view. And it's only because of massive lobbying that the German government has managed to get it through.
Wonderful, thank you, Anders. Agnia, any other thoughts on those two questions?
Well, I think the question here is really to consider, what will be the effects if this pipeline is built. And we know Russia is an energy power, and we know that Russia has used energy as a tool of its foreign policy. And not only the times that, the Congresswoman had noted, the times that Russia, we know, has halted gas supplies to Ukraine in 2006, 2008, when there were even casualties in Poland because gas was shut off in such a cold winter. But also the numerous times Russia has threatened to cut off gas supplies, the numerous times it has spiked gas prices or threatened to raise prices exorbitantly. So it has always used this as a tool of its foreign policy. And for me, personally, in 1990, my family experienced Russia's gas and oil cuts after the country had declared its independence. And in the middle of the winter, the country was just shut off for extended periods of time with no supplies of oil and gas. The oil pipelines to the Baltic states, to Latvia and Lithuania have also been permanently shut off since 2003 and 2006, after Russia had concluded alternative pipeline infrastructure. So this has been a pattern. I actually discussed this in my first book. When Russia completes alternative pipeline infrastructure, whether it be for oil or gas, and it usually completes this for political reasons, then it shuts off the old infrastructure that used to service neighboring countries that are no longer politically in line with them. So I think this is what we can expect going forward after Nord Stream 2 is built. It's just a question of time.
Great, thank you, Athena. Ambassador Herbst, I hope you had your coffee this morning. Two good ones for you. First from our friend John Lowe. Great that you could be here with us, John, from London. The Germans argue that the U.S. is being hypocritical because it is importing more Russian crude oil than ever before. Are they right? And second question for you, given that 2 rounds of sanctions have not stopped the pipeline, why would a third?
Okay, on the first question, look, we're not saying that Europe cannot use Russian gas. We're saying that this pipeline would enable Moscow to manipulate gas supplies to Eastern Europe to pressure countries in ways that are unacceptable. Also, that this would build up closer cooperation between Germany and Russia, which is dangerous geopolitically. As for your second argument, I would disagree. As I mentioned before, after Congress passed the sanctions in December of 2019, construction on Nord Stream 2 halted and remained stopped by and large up until the Biden administration came into power. So I don't have any doubt that if these sanctions that have been passed are now used, we'll see a stop in production as companies bail. So this is an effective way to stop the pipeline. Not the only way, but an effective way.
Great, thank you so much. Ambassador Fried has to go at 11. We will continue this discussion until 11:15. So if you have questions for Ambassador Fried, get them in now. Ambassador Fried, are you still there? Your camera seemed to have gone off. Nope. Okay.
I'm here.
Wonderful. Okay, question for you. This is from Darian. He wants to know, shouldn't we propose a workable alternative to the Germans if they cancel Nord Stream 2?
If they cancel Nord Stream 2, unlikely that they simply cancel it, but the discussion that needs to happen is a discussion of European energy security and the role of Russia. And that should be a discussion where all the players are talking about the common objectives and the common problem. That is, the Poles certainly, but the European Commission, the Germans, and the Ukrainians need to be part of this discussion. Long history of Russia using gas as a political weapon. Long history of Russia, Russian sabotage. I mean, literal sabotage. If you think about the fatal blowing up of a Czech ammunition dump in 2014. I mean, let's remember who we're dealing with. So there needs to be a continued discussion of energy. And let's also remember how much progress we've made, how much Europe has done, and how much better shape it's in than it was in 2005 when I first raised this issue at an EU political directors meeting, and they all looked at me like I had two heads. Europe has moved. This is a major European policy success that they've gone so far as to limit the ability of the Russians to exploit Nord Stream 2. They're not where they need to be, but they made progress. And Ukraine, by the way, is in far better shape than it was when the Russians cut off gas. The gas that goes through the Ukrainian pipeline moving west is not used by the Ukrainian economy anymore. The Russian gas that Ukraine uses is gas that comes to it from the West. Some of that is Russian gas, but it goes through Germany first, which means it's just a little bit harder, well, considerably harder maybe, for Putin to cut off the gas to Ukraine without also cutting it off to Germany. What Ukraine is vulnerable to is the $2 to $3 billion a year of gas transit fees. That's serious, but it's a lot less serious than it was 15 years ago. So let's continue the discussions about energy security. Let's build on our success, and let's reach the point of EU gas solidarity, everybody equal, not countries more vulnerable than others. And this ought to be the goal. It's a European solution. I say that because you now have a pro-EU administration in Washington, and the Germans love to talk about EU solidarity. The Poles have been appealing to EU solidarity in the context of Nord Stream 2. So let's rally around that principle and mean it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. One more question for you, if you could stick on for one more minute. From Ambassador Morningstar, he says, do you agree if Germany doesn't step forward, U.S. should move forward on sanctions and there could be a waiver if circumstances change, particularly after the German elections?
Yes. And this was the point that John Herbst made. Like, John's point, and he was right, is what are we talking about with an alternative if Germany isn't going to play? If Germany doesn't make it clear very, very soon that it wants a way out of this mess, and it can do so privately, the U.S. is going to impose sanctions. Now, the latest Nord Stream 2 Sanctions Act did actually provide for and encourage consultations between the U.S. and Germany on this issue. And it made it possible to waive the sanctions. It lowered the standard from national security to national interest. That doesn't mean the Biden administration can just waive it for no good reason. It has to have a reason. But that means that Congress, even in the Sanctions Act, was inviting the administration to consult with the Germans, but it can't be a one-way street. The Germans have to want to do it. So, yeah, Ambassador Morningstar's right. Sure, we may get into a position where we're putting on sanctions but trying to waive them. I hope we don't get there, but it doesn't matter what I hope. It matters what the reality is, and the Germans cannot expect President Biden to simply accept Nord Stream 2 when the administration is already on record saying it's a bad idea, and since Congress is united on this one. So, right.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anders, question from Robert Brinkley in London. Thanks for joining us, Robert. Thank you for a great analysis, Anders. Too often the media focuses narrowly on the financial rather than strategic effects of Nord Stream 2. Many NATO and EU members believe Nord Stream 2 is misconceived. Should the U.S. not seek to build a broad coalition to dissuade Germany rather than going head-to-head in a U.S.-German confrontation? Dan, I think, and Ambassador Herbst answered that, but any other thoughts on that?
I basically agree with it, and we are seeing that most of East Europeans are firmly against, of course, the three Baltic countries and Poland most of all. The Nordic countries are, so to say, quietly against it. They look upon what possibilities do they have to block it, and they look to Brussels and say that this is an EU issue rather than a national issue. But we are seeing how Denmark is fighting tooth and nail to block it, and Denmark can actually now do more because the Russians do, as far as I understand, do not comply with the Danish demands for independent third country certifiers and insurers for the ships that are laying the pipes. So this is a good idea, but it's also sensitive if the US would directly go in and try to split the European Union, because that's exactly what this administration does not want. So just a bit, but not too much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anders. Agni, a question for you from Bart Osterfeld. He says the off-takers of the gas, if the pipeline is completed, are the big European multinational energy companies like Shell. They all have a US presence. Why not just sanction deliveries through the pipeline once completed and render it a dormant asset? Does that make sense, Agnia?
Yes, it makes sense. I mean, and you could argue, and some people could argue that, you know, the final arbiter anyway for this pipeline is going to be the supply and demand, right? Whether there's actually going to be demand for this gas in Europe, considering that we know European gas demand is not going to increase. The difficulty, though, here, I would say, why complete this asset when there's no current need for it? And again, sink more cost into it. And this is, I think, what, you know, essentially Russia is trying to do with this pipeline, with Nord Stream 2. As it's seeing its competitive advantage diminish in Europe when there are more different sources of supplies, more alternative pipelines, when there's, more countries are turning to LNG, it's trying to really cement its hold on the European gas market by creating this infrastructure, by putting in this long-term infrastructure, because it thinks that in the future it will still, kind of have a leg up over LNG deliveries, over, Nabucco pipelines, over American LNG, and so on.
Wonderful, thank you. Ambassador Herbst, from Robert Casey, he wants to know more about the implications of Germany's elections. Do the Greens have the political capital necessary to halt Nord Stream 2, even if they don't capture the chancellery?
If the Greens come in a strong second position, then their requirements to join the government are probably going to include an end to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So you can't say this is absolutely guaranteed, but the likelihood is I think, is real. So again, that's another reason why we should act now to prevent this issue being decided in a nasty way against our interests, against our core interests, before the German election has a chance to have an impact.
Wonderful, thank you. This is a question for Ambassador Herbst and anyone else who wants to jump in. From Martin, he says, don't you fear an even more serious deterioration of Russian-West relations if Nord Stream 2 is forced to stop? Don't you think that letting the pipeline be finished at this point and let it be regulated by EU laws is a better option? Ambassador Herbst, do you want to take the first stab at that one?
I think we need to understand that there are difficult relations between Moscow and the West, because Moscow is a serial aggressor in Georgia, in Ukraine, and in various other places as well, including interference in German elections, American elections, et cetera, and so on. To thwart your rival who is committing aggression is very much in America's interest and Western interests. I can't imagine a stronger message to Moscow that its provocative behavior is bad for Russia than stopping Nord Stream 2. That would be the sanction, as opposed to the ones that we've implemented in recent days.
Thank you. Anders, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, agree, but I would like to add that there is an old saying that is very popular in Russia: the appetite increases while eating. And I think that all of us, old Russia, have a clear sense that the best way of handling Russian aggression is to stand up against it, expose it. And we have seen now all these GRU and FSB squads that have been walking around, traveling around Europe and also the US actually, that killing people and blowing up stuff and carrying out cyber attacks, that they have been going on because they have not been stopped. Now such activities have to be stopped. And we had a wonderful illustration now on the 15th of April, the Biden administration, to the happy surprise of some of us, came up with a full sanction strategy on Russia. What happens then? 1 week later, Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu declares that Russia is withdrawing its troops around Ukraine because the maneuver has been successfully completed. Whether this is actually the case or not, it was at least a defensive sign. So the short answer is one has to stand up to Russia. There is no need to give in for nothing.
Thank you, Anders. Agnia, another technical question for you. What is the likelihood that Nord Stream 2 will end up being a stranded asset because of the transition to a sustainable energy mix?
Yeah, I think that's, in pure market conditions, we could expect Nord Stream 2 to become a stranded asset. But I think we've seen that, and I would say in pure market rationale, Nord Stream 2 would never have been built. But we see currently that the European energy market is not operating on pure market rationale. We see it's operating on the basis of actually quite effective Russian energy lobbying and special interests. So while, again, in pure economic theoretical terms, we could expect, frankly, there's no use for this pipeline, especially with Europe's, green policies, Europe's access to LNG. But I think quite likely, if this project is built, if the pipeline is built through extensive lobbying, corruption, special interests, it could be in use.
Great, thank you. Another question from Leslie Palti Guzman. Great discussion beyond Nord Stream 2's geopolitical impact. Do you agree that the pipeline startup or cancellation will have an impact on European LNG demand as well as global LNG trade? I heard that Nord Stream 2 would bring new volumes of gas, not just diverted volumes from Ukraine. Agnia or Anders, or both of you, could you weigh in on that, please?
Anders, do you want to go ahead first?
You start, Agnia. Apollo.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Okay, so beyond the geopolitical impact of Nord Stream 2, do you agree that the pipeline startup or cancellation will have an impact on European LNG demand as well as global LNG trade? I heard that Nord Stream 2 would bring new volumes of gas, not just diverted volumes from Ukraine.
That's a big debate. Or not much of a debate, maybe from our panel. Since European gas demand is not expected to increase, and since Nord Stream 2 is effectively just a diversion of gas away from the Ukrainian pipeline system to this new pipeline system, it's quite unlikely that this is going to bring new gas into Europe. But I think, as I just stated in my previous answer, this is in a way to try to hold on for Gazprom to the European gas market, while there are new alternatives right now. While there are, frankly, LNG pipe import terminals right in the region, right on the Baltic Sea. I mean, there's one in Poland, there's one in Lithuania. I mean, it's Germany itself has announced plans that it would like to build an LNG import terminal. I mean, frankly, which would make much more sense and would be much more in line with the European energy policy and energy policy priorities and the third energy package, considering that they call for diversification of energy routes and sources.
Thank you so much. At this point, I want to wish Ambassador Fried a big thank you. We loved having you here. You're dismissed, sir. And over to Anders.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would first of all say very much that I agree with what Dan Fried said previously about that the EU has made massive improvements in the energy area. And the EU has really taken greenhouse gas exhaust limitation very, very seriously. And this shows in number. The total EU consumption of gas in 2019 was 390 BCM, of which 43% came from Russia. It will never be so much again. It was then 168 BCM, and last year it was down to 130 BCM, and it will now be less for each year, but not falling very fast, because the EU is doing whatever you can in order to limit the exhaust of greenhouse gases. So Russia is on the losing end, and then the prices are down. the prices are approximately half of what they were a decade ago, and they are not likely to increase. The gas demand will be somewhat boosted by Germany, the Czech Republic, and Poland having to abandoning coal-powered power station to some extent, but this is a very limited effect, and Germany is abolishing its nuclear power, which also gives some gas, but it's very limited. So we should never expect more than 135 BCM to be delivered from Russia to the European Union. And if you look further to the east, Ukraine used to import 110 BCM a year in around 1990. Now it's down to 13 BCM a year. So there's a massive saving of energy that is going on everywhere in Europe, including in Eastern Europe. So gas is becoming a surplus commodity. And I checked on Ukraine. Ukraine gets 1/4 of its imported gas from American LNG, which goes through the Polish LNG terminal in Świnoujście on the Baltic coast. So LNG has become the price setter in Europe. And it's the LNG spot market that has driven down the gas prices, which while Gazprom is trying to stick to their multi-decade long take or pay contracts, and they're on the losing end. So I don't look upon Russia as an energy threat, really. I look upon it as an energy loser that is losing out all the time to, as Agnia said, to the market forces. And the European Union has then introduced all these converters, extra storage, and also extra pipelines. I should add here an argument that we have not brought up. Italy and Bulgaria have been very sour about Nordstrom because they wanted South Stream. And the European Commission said no to South Stream, but the European Commission was not strong enough to say no to Germany. It was only strong enough to say no to Italy. And the South Europeans are pretty sour about this. Why is Germany allowed to do what Italy and Bulgaria are not allowed to do?
Interesting point. Thanks. Agnia, did you want to respond or say anything else?
I will also add that, we've talked about that Europe should be having these discussions, but in fact, these discussions have already been had in Europe. I mean, the agreements, the policies have been written, the European energy policy, the third energy package. And it's I think only in this case, Germany, as current Europe's leading power, has is trying to get more maneuver room and trying to go kind of against these agreements that have been struck in solidarity already.
Wonderful, thank you. Last question to Ambassador Herbst. How can we expect Russia to react if the project fails? How far are we prepared to go to kill this project?
Well, I think we're prepared to go to kill this project, and it will happen via sanctions unless Germany comes up with a sensible solution. And Moscow has really very little leverage on this, and they'll simply have to accept it. They will growl once it happens, but I think it will be another very strong signal. In fact, perhaps the strongest signal we'll have sent yet, that Moscow's aggressive foreign policy is bad for Russia and bad even for the Kremlin and the people around Putin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambassador Herbst. Anders, congratulations on a fine report. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My team will put that report down in the chat. Your homework is to read it. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.